And you have this plan and this path, and then this news that, hey, you got benched and things are not going to work. And hard work always gives you peace of mind and always allows you to look yourself in the mirror and know that you put your best foot forward. But it didn't pay off there. And that was gut-wrenching. It was brutal.
All right, we are back for another episode of Under the Number. This is a big one today. We have Max Browne, former Pitt quarterback, former USC quarterback, former #1 recruit in the nation coming out of Sammamish, Washington, class of 2013. Max, thanks so much for jumping on.
Awesome to be here, Brent. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So we'll obviously jump through your entire athletic arc and bring it all the way up to speed with what you're working on today. But for you, I mentioned top recruit, no lack of hype, could have played anywhere you wanted in the country, obviously ended up at USC. But I was reading, just in preparing for this, you actually received your first offer before you had started a single high school snap. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that even happens?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy looking back on that. This is pre-social media recruiting. This is, it's a different landscape back then. But yeah, I went to like the premier football high school in the state of Washington, public school, Skyline High School. We had a good run there of, for a public school in the suburbs of Seattle, being nationally ranked for like a 5-year run there. It was pretty special. And the quarterback before me at my high school was the #1 quarterback in the country as well in the class of 2010, Jake Heaps. And so everyone was kind of like, who's going to replace this guy? Who's going to replace this guy? And so the eyes were very much on our program still. And we had a good little 7-on-7 run there before my sophomore year, when obviously those were the real snaps. And the University of Washington with Sark as a relatively new head coach. They had a 7-on-7 tourney, and one of my receivers out wide was a big 5-star recruit. He ended up going to Washington. So there was a lot of eyes on our program, and we did well in the 7-on-7 circuit. And Sark offered me, it was the weekend after my freshman year of high school ended, and it was a crazy time. I thought there was no way I would even, I hadn't even got a legitimate letter at that point. So to get an offer before the season started, I think I knew I could play at the Division I level, and that was obviously, of course, the goal. But to get that offer, and they asked me to not say anything to anyone because they were tracking Brent Huntley, funny enough. And they was between Washington and UCLA, and Brent Huntley had a much better career than I did. So it's kind of ironic looking back, but they didn't want to spook him off or whatever, going after the hometown kid. So made for a good story. I told my family and my best friend, but no one outside of that, which is funny looking back because nowadays you would never get away with that with social media and all that. But great memory, and obviously was super special at the time.
So that was just the very beginning of what went on to be an illustrious high school football career, to put it mildly, including 3 state championship games, 2 state championship wins, a Gatorade National Player of the Year award, lighting up the stat sheet. When you look back on those years at Skyline, if you close your eyes today, what is the moment or kind of the freeze frame that comes to mind when you think about those epic years in high school?
Oh, wow. Yeah. And if anyone's watching this on video, the shelf above me right here is a lot of the Spartan stuff. It's not Michigan State. I get that often. But those are my best football memories, straight up. It was a blessing to play in college, but my best memories by far and away were the high school memories. Because of your first question, I kind of go back to my first high school start. I broke our school's passing record on my very first start, and our school had a rich history of quarterbacks. My oldest brother was the state player of the year, and to right away kind of not waste any time. It's exactly how you draw it up, and that was a blast. So I point to that, which is the very first memory. And then the very last memory, my very final high school game, undefeated season, state championship, took care of business, was really the perfect season. And growing up for me, my dream, and it's funny, I didn't really realize how religion worked, but I would always pray as a little kid of be help me win a state title with my best friends my senior year kind of thing. And to have it actually work out and play out that way. And again, especially at a public high school in the suburbs of Seattle, like all the guys I played with were guys that I played, youth basketball with and youth football with and went to elementary school with and middle school lunches and all that. And so it really was a fairy tale story there that was, to me, much bigger than the awards or the accolades or the, recruiting stars. It was the fact that, those are still some of my best friends today, and walking off that field, accomplishing the childhood goal was more fulfilling than anything else in my high school awards and all that.
That's awesome. That's so special to have that group of guys with you in that situation. That's very cool. So you had been, by the time that game rolled around, you were already committed to USC. I want to understand for you what was kind of the calculus, and what were you analyzing when you're getting flooded with offers? What were kind of the things that you weighted in a program versus others? Like, were you thinking coach, system, location, offensive style? Like, what really was it? And I have a follow-up question for you regarding NCAA 2004, which I think may have had some influence in your decision, but I'll let you answer the first part first.
Yep, a recent TikTok that came out. That'll be fun to unpack. But no, for me, I think I just had it in my mind that I wanted to play for a blue blood program. It's funny, I know you went to Stanford. I didn't have the grades to get into Stanford, not because I wasn't a really good student. My high school's AP and IB stuff screwed me over because I didn't have the qualifications. But I had in my mind I wanted to go to a blue blood program. I think it's partly because my high school had a rich history, and I think I just loved that, like going to a program that was already established and kind of the prestige with that didn't fear me, that excited me. And then from there, it was, I wanted to get to the NFL. Like, how was I going to get to the NFL? I was going to get there by playing, or like getting on the field, playing for a team that was going to have a national spotlight and, a national audience. But I also was not naive, probably similar to you, and going to Stanford, of like, I knew football would end at some point, and I did. Everyone says it, but I did. I was aware of the network and the academics and kind of, hey, what's your life going to look like when you have this degree? And honestly, that's kind of, that was a reason I got down to Oklahoma and USC for me. And I just envisioned a West Coast life. I envisioned utilizing the USC degree. Candidly, I mean, Norman was great on my visit, unofficial visit, but I didn't see a life there. And that was a factor of going to USC. But at the time, USC was in sanctions and they did not take a quarterback in the grade above me. And so when you did not have a quarterback in the grade above me, and I'm the only quarterback in my grade, they really need to invest in you to have success, because, they kind of have to hit on you, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, there was an opportunity to play right away. I had an opportunity to go in for Matt Barkley, or replace Matt Barkley when he left the NFL. And which I'm sure you'll get into, like, as a West Coast kid, my age group, like I grew up watching Reggie and Matt Leinart. Those were some of my first memories. So that's just like peak. USC was peak college football. So when, they were the number one team in the country at that time, all the other factors outside of that, I kind of got to the point and telling my dad, like, what am I waiting on? This seems like the perfect scenario. And even with the sanctions, I was like, sign me up. Let's do this thing.
So I teased it in the first question. I see you got the 5-star QB book right over your shoulder, Yogi Roth's book, and I read it in there actually even before you made the video talking about the video game influence. But you mentioned that playing as USC in the NCAA 2004 video game with Matt Leinart and all the guys on that team, that actually probably laid the groundwork for where you wanted to end up going down the line.
That's funny, dude. I forgot I said that in that book. I got to go back and read that. But yeah, I mean, 4th grade Max, just got my first Xbox, one of the first games, NCAA football 2004. And for whatever reason, I think it was one of those things where, like, when you pick which team's going to be your team in a video game, like, you never want it to be like the first or second best team, but you want your team to be good enough. And so, like, the 9th ranked USC team with Matt Leinart and Kerry Colbert, Mike Williams, Reggie wasn't even starting at running back there. Like, that was, for whatever reason, like, that was my squad. And I always say to folks, like, my parents went to Idaho. My dad kicked at Idaho. I never really had a college football route. It was always kind of hey, I want to get to the NFL, and obviously you have to go to college through there, but I want to get to the NFL. My best childhood friend was a Washington State fan, so I was a pseudo Coug, I guess, growing up a little bit, but I never really bought into I never drank the Kool-Aid of the Washington Huskies, even though I was right in their backyard. Um, and yeah, so it was like USC on the West Coast, and of course they started winning at a high level, and that was always peak college football for me.
This is a little bit out of order, I think, but I also read that your older brother was the quarterback for like the inaugural football team at your high school. Like the school was started in the late 90s, I think, or something like that. And he won, maybe it wasn't the inaugural team, but he won the first state championship for Skyline, or hopefully I'm getting
Yeah.
this at least somewhat correct. But how much of an influence did that have on a younger brother watching Big Brother tear it up like that at QB at the big high school?
Yeah, it was everything. Yeah, I went to at the time my high school, Skyline, in the city of Sammamish. Sammamish was a emerging city and suburb outside Seattle, and my brother was the first quarterback there. School opened in '97. My brother started as a freshman when they had no seniors on the team and got their ass kicked and all that. And then 4 years later, in 2000, when he was a senior, they won state. They won against Reggie Williams, who was played for the Jags, first round pick, big Washington receiver. And like those are my first memories. I mean, I remember like I was 5 years old having to nap before his high school games just so I would be able to stay up. My parents let me stay up, and I just never had a life where football was not like front and center, or at least sports, because I was a football, basketball guy growing up. But I can remember watching those games at 5. I can remember the first recess as a first grader when the footballs rolled out and we're picking teams. Like I was always quarterback. I can remember in 4th grade, which is kind of crazy, like sitting out at hitting drills because we were the only team that could pass the ball. And so we had to, I was just always quarterback Max, and I loved it. I in some sense, I found it a life calling, and it's fun doing podcasts like this because nowadays I would say most people I interact with on a day-to-day don't view me as quarterback Max. They view me as content Max. They view me as the TikTok guy. They view me as the husband of my wife, Victoria, who's got a public presence. Like it's fun tapping into these stories because, in a weird way, it's kind of a different lifetime ago.
Yeah. And so bringing it back to kind of the recruiting timeline of your life, and you talked about what informed your decision with SC. Just talk a little bit about your playing style, because you were 6'5", 220, give or take, pound high school QB, like prototypical pocket passer. Same frame as Peyton Manning, literally almost to the pound. Were you a pure pocket passer, or were you kind of maybe a little bit of a sneaky athlete as well?
Shit, I was a pure pocket passer. I mean, I'd like to think I was a sneaky athlete in the sense that I wasn't just an absolute like stiffy back there. Like I played hoops in high school, and that was always the mold. Is like he's a little bit more athletic than you think, but no, I was a pure pocket passer. And I always say I was at an interesting age gap where, like, if I'm being honest with myself, I was a 5-star quarterback, pocket passer. Peyton Manning was always the comp. But if I was probably 2 years younger, 3 years younger, and the game started shifting to where nowadays it feels like everyone wants at least some level of you can design to run plays. If I was 2 years younger, I don't know if I would have been a 5-star quarterback. I don't know if I would have been the number one quarterback in the country because I didn't have that ability to do zone read. And nowadays, I don't know if a true pocket passer like that will ever be the number one quarterback in the country or will ever be a true top 5-star quarterback. And yes, there's pocket passers like a Quinn Ewers or a Arch Manning. Like those guys are pocket passers, but they can run. They can make moves, and that's just the new era of quarterback, because guys behind me were Kyler Murray was the number one quarterback in the country, or at least up there a few grades behind me, and that's just where the game's heading.
So you talked about the story of starting in first grade. You were the QB from basically the second you could have been, you were QB. And that's probably what everyone in Sammamish associated you with even before you were in high school. Certainly will impact one's identity, or if not define it. So as you came up, elementary, middle school, high school, How would you describe your leadership style? Because I would assume, like you said, you're playing with all your buddies who have known you since you were a kid. I bet they just looked to you and it was basically implied you were the leader because you've always been the leader. How would you have defined your leadership style pre-college?
Yeah, I would say my leadership pre college is probably pretty similar. The line I've always used is like, I don't feel like I ever really like changed per se. It was more of I just kind of I didn't like change who I was. It was more of just kind of a natural like evolution as you grow older and you mature and whatnot. But yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Like that first grade recess story, like I was the guy, I was always one of the captains, and I was always, I was always a vocal leader. That's just, it felt like a little bit like a calling, right? This childhood goal that I had of winning state championships. Like to get there, I knew I needed to rally the kid that was the second string running back and the kid who didn't really want to play football, but his dad's forcing him to play. I need to tap into him. I need to relate to him. Just like, there were days where, I got into it with my best friends, which not in an arrogant way. I think if they were on this podcast, they would say, "Hey, that helped us win," and vice versa. Like they would chirp back at me if they thought I was overdoing it. And I think I had a temperament, and I try to say this humbly, but where I felt like leadership was one of the strengths that I had, and I had a good pulse for being able to relate to different kids. And that's the beauty of football, right? Is especially when you get into college, is I grew up in a upper middle class suburbs of Seattle, and one of my college roommates, his dad was in prison, and being able to relate to kind of different lifestyles and whatnot, I think it's important. But I was always a vocal leader, but I was hyper aware that you can't say shit if you aren't working your ass off, for sure. And I prided myself in that. And as a young player, I was a ball boy in middle school, and then ninth grade, I was able to observe kind of what different leadership styles look like. And yeah, I feel like that was a big part of my game. And was fortunate to, I was a captain at USC. I was a captain at Pitt for my 1 year there. And I just think that's imperative at the quarterback position to be able to relate, motivate, and push your teammates from all walks of life.
This is something that I always like to ask the QBs who I've had on this show. Talk about that first year in the QB room at USC, because a QB room by its design is this little pressure cooker of the best QB. Everyone was the best QB at their hometown, certainly best QB at their high school, came in as this highly touted recruit. Everyone has, in a lot of cases, kind of come in having kind of kissed their ass the entire way up in a lot of ways. You're surrounded by people telling you you're the greatest, and then all of a sudden it is the definition of a meritocracy. Hopefully, I think if you can keep the politics that sometimes do creep into these programs out of it. But you got to this QB room, and you had Max Whittick, you had Cody Kessler. Barkley had just gone, if my timeline's correct, and he had also been the first QB maybe ever, at least in a long time, to have started as a true freshman at USC. Yep. So there was precedent for starting in your first year. Talk about that room and just how you were received and what it felt like walking in there.
Yeah, you said it. There was precedence to start as a true freshman, and so I walked in there thinking, perfect. I'm gonna win this thing, and not from an arrogant standpoint. It was just like I'm gonna outwork these guys. I'm gonna come in early, stay late, and that was always the formula I always had, and so it always worked to my up into that point. And of course, I got there, and it didn't work. I needed at least a year to kind of transition to college football. But the room, I mean, you said it. It's a pressure cooker, especially at a place like USC where you're going to USC to get to the NFL, and you're going to USC, and we all know whoever's going to be the starter, like right away, is going to be a household name, and is going to honestly, it's going to be part of who they are for the rest of their life. But I walked in there, and Cody Kessler and Max Whittick. Cody had won the backup job his freshman year, and then Max won it the next year. And so they had been battling back and forth. And so I think they both were kind of like sizing up this, 5-star number one quarterback in the country. He's coming in to take our jobs, and everyone kind of knew the deal. And I think there was always a respect level there, but we never were homies. I was always, cool, especially as, I guess as time went on and they realized hey, this Max guy, he's a good dude. And, one thing people underestimate is you're spending so much time with all these quarterbacks that you're making your life harder if you are a dick in the quarterback room. And so naturally there's some camaraderie that naturally happens, just because, again, you're spending so much time with these guys. I know when I first went to college, I was like, oh, I'm never going to be friends with these guys, and you kind of feed into the whole thing like they're trying to take your job, they're trying to take food off your plate and all that. And that's exaggerated because at the end of the day, we're all good dudes. But I would say I was closer with Max Whittick. Max kind of had a temperament of, hey, I don't care who you are, I'm going to beat you out. Don't worry about it. We can be nice. I'll help you out, but I'm better than you. That was kind of his temperament. Cody was a little bit more of, I got to fight and scratch and claw and all that. And I think that was a little bit of what made him a successful USC quarterback, because he didn't have the strongest arm. He wasn't the biggest dude, but he was extremely consistent. But yeah, it was a pressure cooker of a room. Good dudes. We were talking about it before, but Max Whittick and I would train together with Steve Clarkson. And so always got love for Max, and do some USC radio with Cody now. But yeah, pressure cooker of a room for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always interesting because, take my experience. I was a preferred walk-on. I always had great camaraderie. I was totally cool with Keller Christ, Ryan Burns, KJ Costello, a fellow walk-on Jack Richardson, because realistically, I was not a threat at all. I was there to work hard and show up on time and, contribute to the team in the ways that I could, but Keller Christ was not worried about me. And so it creates a completely different dynamic when you come in as the hotshot, right? As the number one guy. That's
would that piss you off of like, oh, I wish I had more respect from these guys? Or was it, hey, you knew what you were signing up for?
I was for one, I was a freshman who came in with no summer, you don't go to the summer workouts as a preferred walk-on. You show up day one of training camp. You just get thrown in. And Stanford, one thing that is good about Stanford is that once you're there, the expectations as far as everything that you are expected to know, that you're expected to do as a non-scholarship versus a scholarship player, it's the same. So, getting grilled in the quarterback room, being at every single lift, being held to really high standards at every lift, every run, like you're kind of held to a very high bar. So as far as feeling like the guys respected me, I always felt on a very personal level, they had plenty of respect. They just weren't like, oh, here comes this guy. They were only trying to help. It was such a big delta. Keller had been there for years. He was a number one guy. Burns was in your class, also a very highly ranked recruit. They had been battling it out, not to mention trying to get through Stanford's encyclopedic playbook. So they had just gotten to the point where they were getting comfortable with the offense. And it's like, okay, you just got to be realistic, and maybe I needed more of a killer instinct, but I was just like, realistically, if I stick around here, I can develop, I can light it up against the UC Davis Aggies or the Rice Owls one day. That was more realistically what my path had been if I'd stuck around.
Hey, I called some games on Stanford where they were deep into the walk on a couple of years ago. Like they were running out of quarterbacks. So they could have used you.
Jack Richardson was my really good buddy, and he basically saved the team through an entire spring ball because he was the only quarterback. This is after I left the team. Only quarterback available, and thankfully he got his Scully after that heroic spring ball effort. But so back to kind of your mindset. So you're in this room, you kind of get your bearings and understand, okay, I guess this starting as a true freshman is not going to happen. I need more development. However you looked at it, I'm sure you analyzed it. You're clearly a very analytical person and player. Did your mindset then shift to, okay, there was maybe an anomaly with Barkley having started as a true freshman, but on the flip side, let me look at Mark Sanchez, who sat, played, of course, made it to the NFL, lit it up at USC. Were you kind of then reframing in your mind what your model was then going to be, given the kind of reality of the situation that was unfolding around you?
Yeah, it took me like a whole nother year to really reframe my mindset because The 2013 season, we went 7-5, and Cody was the starter. Cody and Max had battled it out for like the first 3 games, but like Cody didn't tear the world up that season. He was fine, but didn't tear the world up. And then we got a new head coach, Steve Sarkisian. And to bring it back to your first question, or one of your first questions, like that was the coach that first offered me. So that next off season, as I'm gearing up for my redshirt freshman year, I'm saying, sweet, I got the growing pains out of the way. I'm going to enter this spring ball. I'm going to be a totally new man. A term that one of my coaches would always use is like, hey, the light bulb's going to turn on. Like it's just going to one day just turn on. And so I was a little bit naive to think it's obviously a gradual progression, but I was thinking, hey, I'm going to walk in here and I'm going to win the job, because they told me, classic coach speak, that, hey, we got a quarterback competition this next spring. So my second spring that I was there, and I said, I'm going to win. Like I didn't, candidly, I didn't fear Cody. I knew he was solid. He was one of the most consistent quarterbacks I ever played with, but I was like, hey, I can do this thing. And then I realized into that spring ball, man, I'm still a step behind him. They named him the starter that spring ball. And like, that's when I reframed my mindset of, hey, I'm going to absolutely work my ass off. I take more pride in this than the Gatorade Player of the Year trophy, but I got like weightlifter of the year as a backup quarterback for SC my redshirt freshman year. And it was sticking to that blueprint of, hey, I'm going to work. And you can say whatever you want about me being a bust or me not living up to expectations or whatever, but it's not going to be because I didn't work. And that's where I reframe my mind to exactly what you said of like, all right, I'm going to stay ready. I'm going to be ready. I'm not just going to punt and, party all the time on these next 2 years, but I'm going to stay ready and grow. And hey, when my turn comes, again, I thought it was going to be the next year because Cody did light it up that 2014 season, my redshirt freshman year. I thought there was a world he would jump to the NFL, and hey, I'd have 3 years to start. Worst case, I'd have 2 years to start, a la the Mark Sanchez plan. And so that was kind of when I shifted of, there's no panic here. It's all good. I'll sit and wait my turn. I had good friends. I loved going to school at SC. I love just being around there, and trust the process, trust the plan. And even if I only have 2 years of starting on the back end, that's plenty. Mark Sanchez was a first-round quarterback, and I'd rather have 2 years at USC, 2 successful years at USC, than 3 and having to earn your stripes and re-earn your stripes, like that whole deal. I didn't want to go down that path.
So take us through 2015 and the transition following the off season following leading up to the 2016 season. What happened in 2015? What was the dynamic? What was going through your mind? What were the things that you kept kind of telling yourself to keep your nose to the grindstone despite having to be so patient?
Yeah, so it really took me 2 years to get acclimated to college football, if I'm being honest with myself. 2 full years, 2 spring balls, 2 seasons, the whole deal. And that third spring ball, so going into my redshirt sophomore year, where Cody is the clear-cut starter, he's one of the best quarterbacks returning in college football. I turned a corner that spring ball, and I played really well. And I remember, man, that a relief, because I was beating myself up there for a little bit, just not feeling like I was playing up to the way I was able to play. And that was the second year under Sark, second year under his system. And I really felt like I turned a corner where it gave me confidence that, hey, when it is my turn, when it is my time, I can do this thing. And I sensed that with my teammates and my coaches, that it wasn't oh, Max is coming along. Oh, Max is, he's growing. It was, hey, no, this is going to be Brownie's team when it's all said and done. And that was fulfilling. That was comforting. That gave me a lot of confidence. And that was a fun 3-month period. And then Sam Darnold arrived on campus that August, and he had the easiest and quickest transition of any young quarterback. Actually, funny enough, him and Kenny Pickett, who I would play with at Pitt, they did not have the growing pains that every other true freshman quarterback I saw had. Of course, they had to grow, but man, did they assimilate into college football real quick. And I remember that August, as Sam started to heat up and started to kind of light up the scout team, I said, I'm going to have my work cut out for me. I wouldn't have said that at the time, but in the back of my mind, I was like, this kid's good. And people started calling him mini Brett Favre and all that. And he quickly beat out the other true freshman that had came in, Ricky Town at the time, who was, funny enough, a 5-star quarterback in himself. But I said, I still had confidence. I still said, hey, I got my work cut out for me, but I can beat this dude out. And so when Cody left in, that 2016 spring, it was a true competition between Sam and myself. We both were playing high-level quarterback play. And I remember after spring ball, Clay Helton sat us both down in the room and said, I'm not going to name a starter. If we did have to start a game tomorrow, Brownie, it would be you. But publicly, I'm not going to say that. And he said, hey, I'm looking at 2 NFL quarterbacks, which is a blessing to have as a head coach. But the competition is going to go into fall, and the best man's going to play. And kind of hearing that, hey, I was leading the competition at that time, which again is funny to say now. And whenever it comes up, it's like, oh, Max, like, they kind of just gave you the starting job because you were the senior, you were the elder guy, and I ended up being a captain that team, voted on by my teammates, and ultimately it didn't work out for me those first few games in the fall, and then Sam got the reins and never looked back. But that whole time, I had the confidence that I'm better than this dude. And Sam and I, you talk about QB elements. Sam and I are still friends to this day. I was cool with Sam. We were buddies. We would hang. We were in the similar friend group. I was much closer to Sam than I ever was with Cody and Max, because he's a good dude. I'm always rooting for him. But at the time, I was like, I can beat this dude out. And obviously, he's still playing in the league, and I'm sitting on my couch right here. But always rooting for him.
Just kind of a side question here, as someone who's now going into commentary, and you've done stuff with Pac-12 networks, and you're doing a lot of analysis. What do you think? Looking back years down the line, what were the keys that made Kenny Pickett and Sam Darnold so prepared to not face a big learning curve as a brand new freshman at a high caliber program?
Right when you asked that, they had a knack for anticipation that I think a lot of young quarterbacks have to grow through. Like young quarterbacks, they need to throw like 15 interceptions on a deep out, and like they need to internalize that I need to get the ball out of my hand quick. What was open in high school is now no longer open, or what you can't wait for it the same way you did in high school. And that's like a obvious statement. And I think every quarterback in high school that's an elite quarterback, you practice the 15-yard timed out, and you do it in shorts and a t-shirt, but it's just different when it's 11 on 11. And both those guys had a knack for just getting the ball out of their hand quickly, and they didn't need to learn what was open in college football. They just knew what was open in college football, both those guys. And I think that allowed them to play freely, because they weren't thinking so much, because it's, of course, I'm just getting the ball out of my hands quickly. And all the other quarterbacks that I played with had to like go through that pain of throwing interceptions and missing reads and getting cussed out. And those guys never did.
So, in that 2016 season, 2016, right? When this is where we are as you're being the starter.
Yep.
Okay. So in that 2016 season, there are a lot of years where USC and a lot of major programs, your first game of the year is a confidence builder. You'll play San Jose State and win by 40, or you see those games on the week 0 games all the time. That was not the case for USC in 2016. Instead, you were playing in what was almost like an exhibition game, Cowboys Stadium against Bama, which you've pointed out, and it's totally true. That was loaded with arguably, one of the best defenses in college football history. And that's who you get to make your first start against. What was going through your mind? And, even in the time between, okay, I'm going to be starting this game. Good, mission accomplished. And then it's like, exhale, wait, okay, now we got Bama and basically playing against an NFL team that Saturday.
Yeah, this might sound naive, but the whole time I was like, sweet, let's beat them, because they were breaking in a brand new quarterback, Blake Barnett, who ended up getting benched midway through that game for Jalen Hurts, funny enough. And we had a really good team. I mean, we had all 4 of our 5 offensive linemen had NFL stints. We had Juju Smith-Schuster, Darius Rogers, Deontay Burnett's lighting up the UFL right now. Like, we had dudes, we had talent, and again, maybe it was naive, but I believed in myself, and we had a defense that was really good too, and we kind of got off to a decent start there in the beginning. And so I viewed it as just hey, this is USC, and how, like, this is going to be an amazing. We're on national television. I'm talking with Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit before the first game. Like, this is peak college football. This is what I dreamed for. This is what I've been training for, not the past 4 years, my entire life. And so it was a special environment there. And this is where maybe USC at that time was, our team was, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. And it's funny because that clip of us coming out of the tunnel is what people remember now, of us being, probably too cocky, of like climbing and scratching and clawing at the tunnel, trying to intimidate Bama or whatever. And we hadn't done anything up into that point. But every guy on USC's team, I would say most guys on USC's team had gotten offered by Bama. So it wasn't like hey, we fear these guys. It was just a different level. But yeah, I think, it was not only Bama, but we played Utah State the next week, and then we played UGA. We played Stanford the very next game, and that Stanford defense is loaded. That Stanford defense had Solomon Thomas, Reed at safety. That guy
Quentin
played
Meeks at corner, Bobby Okereke, linebacker, Casey Toohill. It was deep. Harrison Phillips.
Yeah. I mean, that front seven was nice. Like, that whole team, Christian McCaffrey at running back, like, that team was nice. And that Stanford game, we held with them. But yeah, I guess to answer your question directly, it was like a sweet, let's do this thing. Let's what a way to introduce myself to the national scene. But again, and it's funny, like, I never want to do the poor me thing. At the end of the day, I didn't get it done. I didn't play to a level. And if I'm being honest, like, I think I never was able to just settle in to my starting quarterback role. It was always like I was kind of playing for my life. And I think I played with a level of performance anxiety that never allowed me to just play and just be like I had done at both programs on the practice field. And that's unfortunate. But I do think, I look back at how I started at SC with the Alabama and Stanford, two nationally ranked teams. Then when I got to Pitt, we played Penn State with a Saquon Barkley, top 10 team in the country. We played Mason Rudolph at Oklahoma State and James Washington, which was loaded. And so, again, I'm not making an excuse, but it is a point in my story of, I think I'm 3-5 as a college football starter, and I've never lost to a team that was not a top 10 ranked team in the country. And so, like, it's just kind of one of those deals.
Yeah, that is wild. I mean, when there is such a tight margin, basically non-existent margin for error. This was something I talked to Keller Christ about, and he was straining in a battle with Ryan Burns. This was the camp where I was a freshman, and I was, witnessing this right in front of me every day. And he was the higher ranked recruit. He was a local guy. He had played at Palo Alto High School. People were more excited about Keller than they were about Burns. Like, frankly, that's kind of what the deal was. And they battled it out through camp. And then at the very end of training camp, Coach Shaw announces that Burns is the starter. Keller's completely devastated. He said it's like the lowest point he'd felt, because he just thought that he had worked so hard and that he had really left no stone unturned as far as preparation. But a negative, kind of a downstream effect potentially of all that straining was that he played not to lose rather than to win. And he never let himself play loose. And he was never out there just slinging it around. He was overthinking. He was overanalyzing. And it's just amazing how much, obviously, people talk about it more now, but even compared to 8 years ago, it's amazing how much your psyche 100% impacts your physical play. Like, that doesn't sound like a hot take, but, a team sports psychologist was kind of a novel concept even then.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting. Sometimes I've talked about it to where, like, me in high school, on a different stage, I had a tendency to overthink and overanalyze and consider every input and what if this, what if that. And I literally would find myself sometimes almost being jealous of the guys who were like, this guy is like such a meathead and such a like one-dimensional guy that it's totally working to his advantage. Like, all he's thinking about is going out there and just chucking it and slinging it. And I don't have like some higher ground because I'm thinking about more things or I'm breaking it down mentally more than this guy. He's going to go out, not think, and tear it up. So it's just kind of incredible how that dynamic works in athletics broadly, and probably in no position more than at quarterback.
I relate to that and kind of everything you said. I think that's really well said. And I say this to this day, of some of my best teammates were the guys that cared the least, which is ironic because you always hear, hey, I subscribe. I remember people treat every practice like the Super Bowl. And I remember my first freshman year, like studying the playbook in astronomy class before a random Tuesday practice in spring ball, because this is what the greats do. That was a total mistake by me, because that just hype it. You put so much pressure on yourself. I was not wired, and it sounds like you and Keller Chris are the same way. I don't need someone to say, hey, you got to want it more. You got to get out there, and you got to be studying every last thing. Like, I'm going to do that. Like, if anything, help me like just settle in and relax and play and do all that. And I never was a robot. I think I was always wary that I was wired this way, and I would act like I was, free and loose and all that, and kind of running out there and like hopping around to the music, not like corny or anything like that, but deep down. And again, you said it, performance anxiety was not as well known then, but I definitely had some of that. And I saw a sports psych when I got frustrated in 2013 and 2014 of like, why am I not playing well? But no, I totally relate to that for sure.
Yeah. So, this is, again, bringing it back to the leadership style thing. You had been voted by your teammates to be team captain before this 2016 year. We just walked through brutal gauntlet of games. And after the Stanford game, you get benched. And they're going to go with Darnold the rest of the season. Number one, I'm sure you've told the story a million times, and I'm sure that's a just kind of gut-wrenching conversation. But I'd also like to ask, you're still a team captain. You still know that your teammates love and respect you. They literally voted for you to be in that spot. How do you then carry on as a leader of men, as the backup quarterback who's just been taken down a rung from that starting spot?
Yeah, I would say it was gut wrenching. It's the only time in my life that actually that, and then my career ended on a shoulder injury at Pitt, where it really feels like just life just like pauses, and it's almost like you've been climbing this thing and you have this plan and this path and all that, and then this news that, hey, you got benched and things are not going to work, and your hard work did not pay off. Which I think people always say, oh, hard work pays off. That wasn't the case for me right there. I think hard work always gives you peace of mind and always allows you to look yourself in the mirror and know that you put your best foot forward. But it didn't pay off there. And that was gut wrenching. It was brutal. I remember walking across campus with this little chapel area, and I cried my eyes out for like an hour. And at that time, I was newly boyfriend and girlfriend with my now wife, and I remember texting her and being like, giving her the update, and I was like, hey, I'm fine, but I just need some alone time. Did something similar with my closest friends and my family as well, and it's just brutal because you put so much into it, and especially when you're a guy. And again, it sounds like you're wired this way. Keller Christ is wired this way. When it really feels like it's I mean, you are working your ass off, and it's not, there's no stone unturned. Like, you are trusting the process. Like, it was tough, and your identity's brought up in it so much. Like, it's tough to get up in the morning those next few months. And I was wired as a guy. I was not one of those guys that was, hey, the sun was always shining after I got benched and go team go and let me support the team. I was, hey, I'm gonna respect my coaching staff. I'm gonna respect my teammates. I love my teammates, and my teammates went on to go win a Rose Bowl. And I'm not gonna be a cancer. I'm not gonna be pouting in the corner, but I'm not gonna be rah rah. Can't wait to hold the clipboard. Like, that's not how I'm wired. And candidly, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit when I see backup quarterbacks do that now after they get benched. I'm saying, hey, you're not about that life. Candidly, if that's how you're wired now. And that might be a hot take, but I think my teammates respected that because they knew I was pissed off. And they're at the time, actually, this is, I should call this out. At the time, it was controversial that I got benched. Helton got a lot of flack in the LA Times because we had lost games, yes, but it wasn't as if I was playing, oh my gosh, Max Browne is losing us these games. And that made it even tougher for me to swallow, especially as, you know, you have your family and my inner circle in the back being like, what the heck is going on? Screw this coach and all that, and not buying into that. I think that was tough, right? I was like, hey, that's going to do me no good. I need to show up. I need to be ready, because at that point I'm still one play away. And that was the hardest part, is not checking out on the season, because at that point I'm saying, hey, I got to figure out my next step. And I knew right away that I was out of here at USC. I just knew Darnold was their guy. And I got I was talking to schools legally. Helton let me do it, but I was talking to schools. I'll never forget. I would run scout team quarterback, and we would dice up our defense. We had a loaded team. We had a young Michael Pittman, a young Tyler Vaughns, a young Velus Jones, who's on the Chicago Bears. We had some dudes, and that was fun. But I would go off the practice field after scout team quarterback, and I would talk with other head coaches around the country, because I had my permission to contact, because I think Helton knew that, you know, in some way I kind of got the short end of the stick, and so he threw me a bone of like, hey Max, let's allow you to utilize this time to figure out your next step, kind of thing. And that's what I did. It was always kind of a mission, but it was tough. I'm wary of saying I don't think I was full on clinically depressed, but man, you know, I was right there. It was tough to get up in the morning. It was tough to stay positive. I was not myself for sure, because it's just a gut wrenching hit to your identity when things don't work out and you put your all your effort into trying to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that even having those conversations, you know, you hang up the phone with whoever coach, you had to be like, how is this even happening? I'm literally having transfer conversations. Like, are you kidding me? It's tough to get amped about the possibilities of, you know, clean slate, and then you'll go to this program and we'll reset it. Like, that's not, obviously that's not how you drew it up, you know, as a child or a high school recruit, or even someone in his early years at SC. So,
Yeah.
you know, end up at Pitt. Why Pitt, first of all?
Pitt was the number one offense in the country in 2016, or like right behind Clemson. They had Nate Peterman and James Conner, and that was right. Pitt had, like, at that point, for some of the football nerds, they were the team that started the fly sweep game that took over college football for the next couple of years there, of like tagging fly sweeps onto run plays, and they gave defenses fits there. And I was like, sweet, they got a great offense. Funny enough, the offensive coordinator would leave, but that's for a different podcast, which was unfortunate there. But top 25 team. I felt like I wanted to go to a school where they needed me, and Pitt was one of the first schools to reach out to me when I was transferring. So at the time, I was like, sweet, I'm going to go into a program where I'm going to be the starter. No more quarterback competitions. No more me trying to like look over my shoulder, which is ironic because the guy that I was battling with was Ben DiNucci, who was still in the NFL. He was the Denver's third string quarterback last year. He started a few games for the Cowboys. So This guy that they did not think highly of at Pitt as a like 2-star recruit ended up being an NFL quarterback, because he turned the corner at that time. And Kenny Pickett was a young guy at that time as well. But they were good offense, and they wanted me. And I felt like they had a schedule where we could win and we could do some things. And I had it in my mind that I needed to be at a school in January to have spring ball and get acclimated to my teammates, get acclimated to my offense. I didn't want to be a summer transfer guy, which in hindsight, maybe I jumped the gun. I don't know. I don't regret that genuinely, but I knew I needed to get into a school by January, and Pitt was hot on me in December, and I was like, sweet, if not Pitt, what am I waiting on? And let's do this thing.
And you did have, early in that season, you had one game in particular where you basically had a flawless game. You were 28 for 32, and 3 out of the 4 incompletions were drops. It's like a literal perfect game. Coming off of that one, were you thinking, okay, everyone, like, this is what it was supposed to be, like, and to yourself, like, this is what I've been putting all this work in for. I'm telling you guys I can do this, and I'm telling myself I can do this. What was going through your mind after that killer
The
game?
yeah, it was just straight relief. It was like, oh my gosh, finally, finally. And not a like even hearing you ask that question, it wasn't a like, oh, I proved it to myself kind of thing because and I could sense it. Like my teammates had seen me do that in practice. My coaches had seen me do that in practice. I had been hearing that for years at USC. I had done that in practice. So it wasn't like this, oh my gosh, we never knew Max had it in him. And so it was just pure relief. And I would ultimately get injured the next game. So it was short lived, but that was just fun. That was a special day. That was a game that I'll never forget. And even though it was against Rice, it was a special moment for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, you've mentioned it a couple of times, but the next game you tore your labrum. Not an ideal injury for a quarterback, obviously, and still ended up rehabbing it, which is to me like a pretty incredible display of commitment to what you wanted to do and fight for. Because it's like at that point, 9 out of 10 people would say, "Okay, I end up in this kind of shit show at USC. I finally get my shot, and we're playing Bama. I then get screwed over because we lose a couple games against Stanford and Bama. I get benched. I transfer. Freaking Ben DiNucci ends up being, nipping at my heels, and then I finally light it up, and now my shoulder's busted. Like most people would say, you know what? That's it. Like curtains on this thing, and just totally give up. Instead, you still pursued the whole rehab journey. And I saw something that you put out talking about that you still had a tryout, an NFL tryout. I think it was with the Steelers.
Yep, Steelers and the Commanders.
Right. Okay. So, and obviously you had to throw for those teams, and you pointed out that there was like an 18-yard comeback or something to the far field where you had one specific throw where you were like, all right, I just, my shoulder's not the same. Like I gotta kind of look myself in the mirror here. The
Yeah.
way that you even told that story on your socials, wherever I saw it, it almost seems like that was not an exhale, but it was maybe like, okay, this might be a closing chapter here. What were you thinking then?
Yeah, I never really, it never really was a question on my mind of whether or not I was going to rehab. And I think that Rice game, was a factor of like, hey, Max, you can do this thing, like keep at it kind of thing. And like, hey, that's kind of a little bit of a proof of concept, a little bit. And I still had interest from like agents and whatnot. And I had rookie minicamp invites from like 5 teams. And again, I think it was largely on the back of my high school rankings coming out of school. And I just think I needed a rehab just because at that point, honestly, the rehab was like, hey, this is nothing new. Like, we got to battle back. Like, we got to respond. Like, oh, things didn't work out, but let's dig back in. Like, that was much of the same for that kind of 4, 5, 6 year stretch there. And so it wasn't that huge of an adjustment. But as I got into, you mentioned the tryouts, I got hurt in October of 2017. Now we're talking December of 2018, where, I'd rehab for 15, 16 months. And at that point, another new draft class is coming on the horizon. So I kind of was like, my shoulder is what it is. It's kind of now or never. Let me try out for these teams. And I got out there, and I think it was a little bit of a peace of mind of like, I did the rehab. I battled back. I'm kind of ending on my terms, and that's not true, but just ending on battling back rather than ending on more so of a quitting feel. And I was ready to move on with my life. And I think some people view it as, hey, Max, you rehab for 15 months. Hey, you can keep going. And I get people that say like, oh, Drew Brees was able to rehab this same injury. But to me, it was like, it was miserable, and I had been living a football grind, absolute grind in my mind, and maybe this is my fault, and that I wasn't able to have more fun with it. But for really 6 years, it was a 6 year process of just continuing to battle. And I said, you know what, I want to move forward with life, and there might be some people that say, hey, stick with it and go UFL and go CFL and all that, but I was just like, I genuinely, in my heart, when I look at myself in the mirror, feel like I squeezed everything out of football there, and for whatever reason, it just wasn't meant to be. And I want to be happy in life. And there was a lot of struggle there of kind of finding what my identity is and finding what that next career path is. But I was able to, again, look myself in the mirror and be proud of kind of the work I put into my football career. And that gave me a sense of just kind of being content with how I showed up. And I would hang the cleats up that February of 19.
So, I mean, it's all over your social media. It's literally in your social media bios where you're this like self-proclaimed bust, and you're always talking about how basically things didn't work out and hard work didn't really pay off in the way that, you know, most football movies would suggest for you. And you really are just a serious anti-victim. Like, you have the most anti-victim mentality, which is very admirable. And it's just like this, you know, the concept of extreme ownership. I feel like you're just being a truth teller to yourself and trying to to others, as brutal as it may sound. But why is that your approach, and why is that the way that you're kind of doing this retrospective on your football career with such you know, no punches pulled?
Just feel like it gives me the ability to move forward with life and, you know, not be sitting around Thanksgiving dinner tables, like lamenting the past and all that. And I think the ownership allows you to move forward. And honestly, it kind of sounds like I'm trying to be some macho hardo, but I genuinely, to me, it's not that abrupt of a comment. It's more just kind of matter of fact. Like, the example I always use is, I've been around many a dinner tables where people call Mark Sanchez a bust. And I'm sitting there saying, you're aware that you're calling Mark Sanchez a bust when I'm here and I started at USC and my career was not even remotely close to Mark Sanchez. And I think there's some other guys out there that kind of throw out the bust title. And, you know, you mentioned KJ, and I know KJ personally as well. Like, KJ had a good college career. I mean, he had some successful long stretches of college football. Like, I don't call him I don't call him a bust, but like, again, if anyone's calling him a bust, well then what the hell am I? And so it just feels like that's the truth. That's just the reality of my story. And again, I think I am still able to hold my head high because I know I'm not a bust, because I went down some of these dark paths and some of these drug and partying and money and all those things. Like, I didn't do that. You know, had my fun in college for sure, but like, I take a lot of pride in kind of how I showed up, and it allows me to confidently just own what I feel is a very matter of fact reality of my life, but obviously my football career.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's a very different approach than a lot of the people, like you mentioned, who will sit around their Thanksgiving table lamenting what could have been and kind of doing this long, drawn out identity crisis where they can't possibly fathom that, you know, realistically they're 25% through their life, and that there's probably going to be a lot more in store for them, and bigger fish to fry, honestly, when it comes to real life stuff down the road.
But one last little comment there is, like, the flip side is also true. Like, some people kind of give me flack for not celebrating my accomplishments enough. And like, I'm not necessarily a guy, it's funny with having all the helmets and whatnot behind me. I do that for content for sure. But I'm not a guy that's going to talk about, hey, I was the number one quarterback coming out of high school. And hey, like, there's a lot of people, I get flack for it, of like, Max, you were a captain at USC. Hey, Max, you were a starting quarterback at USC. You should celebrate that. I get that. I appreciate that. But in my heart, given how I was raised and the expectations and how I viewed my abilities and what I could have done, it's just not authentic to me to sit and celebrate my college career, because it just doesn't feel celebratory. And not that I'm not grateful, not that I'm not, you know, fortunate, or I love my teammates. Playing football at USC and Pitt was an absolute blessing, but it just is not, it's not in me to be, you know, super celebratory about those moments, because I felt like I left a lot of meat on the bone, which is again, just kind of part of my story that I feel like I need to own, which probably differs from, you know, a lot of guys that are super outwardly proud of, you know, maybe being a college quarterback that started a few games.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wildly impressive way of handling it, in my humble opinion.
Appreciate that.
So let's wrap it up with a little lightning round here. What I'll do, I'll rattle off just a few questions, and in as few words as you can, or as quickly as something comes to mind, just give me your answer.
Perfect.
First one, best coach you ever had?
Matt Taylor, my high school football coach, was cutting edge offensively for a high school mind, and he's a stud.
Best raw athlete you ever played with?
Ooh, raw athlete. Right away, I got to go Leonard Williams, defensive tackle. To be able to run at that at 300 pounds, goodness gracious.
It's funny. I've had a few guys when I ask best raw athlete, I get offensive and defensive linemen a lot, where people are like, it just doesn't like the physics don't make sense, but some people can pull it off.
Stupid.
All right, so that was your best raw athlete. Who's the best sneaky athlete you ever played with?
Ooh, sneaky athlete. Where my head goes at right away, Brian O'Neill, highest paid right tackle in the NFL. He was I think he was, I guess, a couple of years ago. He, former tight end, transferred to tackle. He was my left tackle at Pitt, and he's an absolute stud. Played hoops with Dante DiVincenzo in high school, and just the perfect mold for a modern tackle is a guy who had a tight end upbringing and then puts on 60 pounds.
You mentioned you got that weightlifting award. What is your least favorite workout that you ever had to go through in training, high school or college?
Yeah, we did it's kind of popular now. We did the Navy SEAL training, and it was like 20 of us that went out to Joshua Tree and spent a whole like kind of nonstop 16-hour workout, physical. And honestly, the worst part was the drive back where they stuffed us all in a van. They put the backup quarterback, me, in the back corner of the van. I was getting like claustrophobic and we're all sweaty and all that. It was absolutely terrible. But that was the summer of 2015.
That's pretty hardcore. Who's your best today? Who is your best quarterback friend?
Best quarterback friend. That's a good question. That's a good question. And it kind of goes back full circle to what we talked about is sometimes quarterbacks aren't that friendly of guys, or like with one another because you're battling and whatnot. I would say Sam Darnold. I'm cool with Sam Darnold. Saw Jared Goff at a wedding a few weeks ago. He was probably my closest friend in the recruiting circuit. I'm not going to sit here and say we're like the best of buds, but those two guys stick out. But probably Darnold.
So back on episode 6, I believe, of this show, I talked to Miller Moss. Miller is the front runner, likely to be the starter for USC this coming season. What is your advice to Miller? If you could talk to him right now, what would you say to him?
I would keep it super basic, but hopefully that hits in a certain way. I would say, have fun. I know you need to have fun. I know everyone says that, but from someone who's on the other side of maybe your worst nightmare, which I don't even know if I would open that up to him, but I would say, have fun, because I think sometimes you need that reminder from people that were in the saddle of you're going to play your best football when you're having fun. Don't let this moment pass you by where you're so intense and so over the top. Like seriously, go out there and don't let a day go by where you are not taking in the fact you're wearing the USC jersey, because I promise you that one thought in the back of your mind of maybe how things would go. And I know everyone's going to tell you, hey, you can't go there. You can't think about all that. Hey, well, let's just for 2 seconds think about that. Your worst thought, it's all good. Life's going to be totally fine no matter how this thing shakes out. So have fun and don't let that moment just kind of pass you by.
Well said. All right, that's Max Browne. Thank you so much. Tell people what you are up to today and where they can find you on socials.
Yeah, this was a blast, man. Yeah, it's fun, especially coming from a fellow quarterback. These questions are obviously straight to the heart. So it was great. But yeah, you can find me on all the social platforms. I'm active on all of them. Max Browne with an E at the end. Some of the handles have a 4 at the end. But yeah, right now I'm a content creator. Football, a lot of football specific content, specifically for short form platforms, and hopefully chatting with a few networks that hopefully getting some broadcast gigs this fall. We'll see though, kind of right in the negotiation and talk front right now. So you'll have to check me out on social to stay posted with the updates there.
All right. Well, best of luck with the broadcasting gigs as well. We'll definitely be keeping an eye out for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent.